Well, as I promised you with the last mock draft, this version of my 2017 NBA mock draft was going to be a 2-round edition, and indeed it is. All 60 picks from both rounds I've mocked are in the description box down below. Enjoy it and then bitch at me about it. That's what we like to do. Anyways, let's talk for a few minutes here about what we're kind of playing out in this particular scenario. Now, you'll notice the top 3 picks have really pretty much stayed the same. And looking at it first from Boston's standpoint, I don't see why, personally, it's such a huge slam dunk conclusion that Markelle Fultz is the first pick. But with that said, it is definitely an option for the Celtics, and at this point, it is probably the most likely option for them. But they have a couple of other options of what I think they could do with that pick, too. They could potentially be looking to package that up in a trade to acquire somebody like a Paul George or Jimmy Butler, although it seems like to me that's not very likely, as they'd be more likely with the cap space that they have to go pursue Gordon Hayward with a big-time max type of contract in free agency, as much as trading for somebody like a Paul George or a Jimmy Butler, especially with Paul George, knowing that he's getting ready to enter the last year of his contract before he can hit free agency. They could also, in my opinion, draft Lonzo Ball #1 and force the hand of the Los Angeles Lakers and force them to give up some future assets, potentially future draft picks. And at this point in time, I don't see why that wouldn't be at least somewhat of a possibility. Now, you could sit there and say, well, the Lakers won't have to give up much because they know that Lonzo's not going to want to play in Boston. More importantly, LeVar is not going to want Lonzo to play in Boston. But I think it is something you have to explore. I think it is something that you have to consider a possibility at least, because maybe somebody else like the Philadelphia 76ers would be willing to give up a little bit more to get a Lonzo Ball. And Philadelphia is still a decent market. You know, Philadelphia could potentially be a positive landing spot, even though it's outside of LA. Iverson became a massive star in Philly. So if Lonzo Ball was that good, why couldn't he? And even just in general, when we're talking about sports, you know, the whole focus of market size. Yeah, market size is nice and market size is important, but I remember in the 90s that Brett Favre was as big of a star as anybody in any sport in this country, and he played in Green Bay, Wisconsin, arguably the smallest market in North American professional sports. If you can play, people will know about you, people will find you. They could draft somebody else, but that doesn't seem very likely. You know, when all said and done, it's probably still going to be Markelle Fultz, and I could see where this would work. In terms of player and fit, I do think Fultz fits very well for the Celtics. So most certainly, even if I don't think he's the true best player in this draft, I won't crap on him for it because I could see where he could play alongside Isaiah Thomas. Expecting him to be your long-term point guard, I think might be a bit of a stretch, but get to that point, we'll cross that bridge, we'll see what happens. But I think for now, being able to get a guy who has the potential to average maybe 23 to 25 points long-term in the NBA and get him on that rookie contract where he's only taking up $4, $5, $6 million of cap space each year has to be incredibly appealing for a Boston Celtics team that is very close, yet not that close to being a championship contender. When you look at the Lakers at #2, there's a lot of reports that they're enamored with Lonzo Ball. It seems like the single most logical fit for all parties involved. We'll see what ends up playing out, but I'd be stunned if he didn't end up in LA, quite honestly. I still like De'Aaron Fox going 3 to Philadelphia. You know, there could be guys like Jayson Tatum that get some consideration here. There could be somebody like a Malik Monk that gets consideration here. But when I look at it, you know, I expect, and you see this play out in this draft with 5 point guards going in the first 9 picks. I expect there to be a run on these point guards early in this draft, which is why a guy like Fox goes #3 because Philly wants to make sure that they get a ball handler to complement Ben Simmons. And I do think that Fox could potentially play alongside Ben Simmons. It's why I've got Sacramento taking Ntilikina from France at #5. You might say, well, that might be a bit of a reach. #1, we're talking about the Kings, so you have to assume some dipshit factor. #2, though, when you look at some of the skill set that Frank has and the size that he has at the position and how desperate also the Kings are for a point guard to build around, the pick doesn't seem that out of bounds. And especially, again, talking about where you have point guards going 1, 2, and 3 in this draft, what that does is that consequently raises the value of these other point guards in this draft to where they get drafted high, potentially get overdrafted. I still got Dennis Smith going number 9 to Dallas, and you could argue maybe that Donovan Mitchell, kind of a combo guard, Louisville going 12. You could make an argument in theory that could be as many as 6 point guard type of guys going in the first 12 picks in this draft. The good thing for some teams, though, is that if you're not in the market for a point guard, you could potentially looking at guys falling into your lap that maybe shouldn't have made it to you, like a Malik Monk for the Knicks. I look at him and what he's able to do as an offensive player, even with the concerns about size and this and that. This is a guy that can flat out stroke it. He's a better shooter than Fultz. He's the best shooter in this draft to me. This is a guy, when he gets hot, he can be absolutely incredible. So if you talk about the Knicks and their desire to want to play the triangle, one of the things you need to play the triangle are guys that can shoot, guys that can space the floor. And Malik Monk can do that from NBA range and beyond with great abundance. You might look at Josh Jackson falling number 10 and wondering why that happens. A couple of factors could be into play. One would be that kind of run on point guards. That could play a role. Also, you have to look at somebody like a Zach Collins. Somebody's going to fall in love with this kid and take him at number 10 or higher. It's bound to happen. And this happens. One or two guys with big size, because some teams fall in love with certain skills for guys that can be stretch fours or so on and so forth. Somebody's going to get drafted. There's going to be some screwball pick, like frankly last year, Thon Maker going 10 to Milwaukee. Even when there was some buzz and rumbling about it. It was still an oddball, screwball, what the fuck just happened type of pick. So there's going to be one. And then when you look at that run of point guards, the screwball picks, some other guys at the position without maybe some of the baggage that a Jackson brings in terms of off the court stuff, guys like Jayson Tatum, guys like Jonathan Isaac. I would think Thibodeau might like Isaac a little bit better because he's got a little more versatility to play both the 3 and the 4, especially defensively. Phoenix might like Tatum because they want a guy that can put the ball in a hoop a little bit more. I think Josh Jackson fits them better, but it would not surprise me to see a Josh Jackson potentially fall because of some of the off-the-court concerns, because of some of the questions about maturity. And believe it or not, Sacramento gets a steal here at number 10. It could happen. So, and even then, when you're looking at other guys that could fall, like Charlotte could have Markkanen fall right into their lap. Lots of things could potentially happen. The Milwaukee Bucks getting a guy like John Collins from Wake Forest. This is a guy with lottery potential, at least from what he can do offensively. He might be there at number 17, again, because of that run on point guards, because of other factors that could come into play. And we're being honest here. We still don't know what the market is going to be for the international players in this draft. Like, I think we've got 6 guys that played overseas this past season. I've got going in round number 1. I know Terrance Ferguson kind of sort of really doesn't count because he's an American kid that went overseas to play for a year. But you never know with some of these teams, especially teams like Portland. You've got 3 first-round picks, and they're really up against it in the Caps situation. Are they really going to sit there and want to commit themselves to 3 guys that go against the salary cap starting this year? Probably not. They might want to draft and stash 1 or 2 guys. They might want to sell off one of their first-round picks to a team like the Knicks or the Nets or somebody else that might want an additional first-round pick. How many of these other teams, especially picking in the tail end portion of the draft, Atlanta, they got to worry about re-signing guys like Paul Millsap and Tim Hardaway Jr. Are they potentially going to look at a draft and stash type of dude? Could Toronto look at a draft and stash guy? Utah, Orlando with their second first-round pick. Portland, like I mentioned. The San Antonio Spurs, the Utah Jazz again. There's all types of possibilities, so it's really hard to say, when you talk about the NBA mock draft. To me, there's a lot more fluidity and a lot more unpredictability as opposed to, let's say, an NFL mock draft, because you frankly just don't know. And as I always talk about with any draft, and it most certainly holds true in the NFL and the NBA too, is that it only takes one team. It only takes one team to fall in love with the guy. It only takes one team to grade a player at a certain level to have him go way higher than anybody projected and to have all hell break loose in the NBA draft. And frankly, it's kind of what I thought happened last year when Thon Maker went number 10 to Milwaukee. That was that guy. That was that pick. The Bucks fell in love with him. They saw the upside, and they took him, and they said, screw it. Well, this year, who's that guy going to be? It's going to be somebody. It's going to be some team does something crazy. I don't know who it's going to be yet. That could be the Zach Collins going number 6. It could be somebody like Harry Giles or Anunoby from Indiana going in the top 10. It's one of those guys, a Jonathan Jeanne from France. One of those guys going in the top 10 wouldn't surprise me. And if it did, it will bring pandemonium what looks to be at least a pretty good draft class this year.